It's time for the educational breakdowns brought to you by Robert Hess and Fabiano Caruana. I'll quickly set the tone and say we had another Ruy Lopez. For those who've been following the whole match and love the opening theory, H3 was played in move 1, A4 was played in move 3, and then yet again here in game 5, Fabi.
Yeah, I kind of expected that he would try this again because Magnus's last recipe, although it worked out very well, was a bit of a objectively shaky one. When he played bishop to b7, d3, d6, knight bd2, and here he played the rare move rook to e8, and it worked out very well for him in that game. He equalized very comfortably, but I'm sure that Jan and his team of seconds found some ideas here.
Yep.
So Magnus was the one to, again, try to surprise Jan before Jan showed his ideas in the main lines.
With rook b8 here.
But Jan was, again, very well prepared for this move. He quickly blitzed out h3 and c3, and after b4, d3. He was playing very, very rapidly here.
Robert, you really liked d3. We spent a lot of time in real time talking about the traditional Spanish structures. It was very educational. But tell everybody why you felt, I remember during the game, you were saying this was already a good sign from your point of view for Jan.
Yeah, because he has such a good position where black's pieces are restricted. So when you have less space, you often want to make trades. And Jan isn't allowing a series of mass trades. He's not handing black's pieces good squares. So I found that d3, just trying to develop the knight to d2, reroute it to better squares over the king side, or the c4 square over there on the queen side, that this made a lot of sense. So I liked the start of this game for Jan. I think d3 was a great choice. He showed good opening preparation.
And to remind everybody of a critical variation that Fabi and Robert were going over in real time in terms of why, as Robert said, d4 is not what you want to play. You don't want to let your opponent make trades when they have less space. The key move order after d4 is not taking here first, where the b pawn then stands in the way of the rook and the knight's activity, but actually to play the move b takes c3 would have come from black, followed by e takes d4, if my mouse doesn't jump around there, and then d5, as you can see, with the knight coming to e4, black's pieces are very active on the queen side. So that didn't happen. d3 was played by Jan. Still playing very quickly, guys. After the trade in d5, you showed a critical line here, Fabi, why white doesn't take here and take the e5 pawn, right? Let's do that again.
Yeah, let's have a look at e takes d5 because it is the most critical approach. Grabbing the pawn always has to be considered. But after knight takes, rook takes, and bishop to e6, white has very serious tactical problems to deal with. First of all, the threat of knight takes c3. There is that discovered attack from bishop on e6 on the bishop on b3. And also pointing out what you mentioned earlier, the rook on b8, pointing out the bishop on b3 is very important. And if the bishop moves somewhere to escape that threat, then after bishop f6, we see the other problem. White's rook on e5 is in the way, and the c3 pawn is going to get captured. So that's why Jan didn't take it. And I noticed when Jan played knight bd2 here, I noticed that Magnus looked a bit disappointed. Of course, he must have known about this move, but I think he was disappointed that Jan was not surprised by his opening choice with rook b8, and he was still playing quickly. I think the main point of rook b8 was to surprise his opponent, and it didn't work out, and that's why he was probably not too happy with the opening outcome.
Yep. Well, and it didn't work out not just from the practical point of view of what you're saying and judging Magnus's body language, but white was better here, starting with an idea, a very important one from Robert, which was queen c2, keeping the shot of bishop d5 open.
Yeah, because black's pieces are sort of stepping on each other's toes. They're fighting for the e7 square. We mentioned queen e7 to try to play bishop e6 because that light square bishop for white is very powerful. But queen e7 always ran into bishop d5, trying to remove that knight. You can't capture. You don't want to unleash the rook against the queen. So it felt like black was stumbling a little bit trying to find good moves. I did like what Magnus did with h6 first, making sure no piece from white is going to g5, and then rerouting the knight over to the king side to g6. So this was all well played by both sides. And now was such a critical moment where white was considering, do I jump into f5? Do I play this move bishop e3, which I think is a good developing move? And then the question revolved around knight f5 or eventually c4 for white.
Yeah, and we spent a lot of time in real time, everyone, looking at the critical tactics of knight f5 and knight takes e4, which is a very common idea in these positions and one that you have to follow closely. Some variations included knight takes h6 followed by bishop d5, where this knight is sort of pinned because of the f7 pawn's pinned to the bishop. We would not get these types of fireworks on the board, boys, as much as we hoped for it. But after bishop e3 and queen e8, we felt that it was reasonable to get these fireworks maybe with c4, hashtag boom goes the dynamite, Fabi, but we didn't get it.
I liked Jan's decision to play bishop e3 rather than knight f5, despite our hopes that we would get some crazy fireworks and potential attacks on both kings. But starting from this moment, I think that he played a bit too routinely.
Yep.
Very logical moves. You can't really criticize rook e to d1. It slightly improves the rook from a semi-closed file to an open file. But we did mention the move c4 here was probably a good chance, posing Magnus some very concrete problems. How do you deal with the threat of c5? Black has to either at some point play c5 to stop it, or move the bishop out of the way to deal with it. And none of those options seems very easy. And that, coupled with the clock situation where Magnus was significantly down on time compared to Jan, I think he would have been able to put serious pressure on Magnus if he were to play this way. So this is the first moment I think we can talk about Jan starting to let the advantage slip.
And Robert, quickly to tell everyone, why do both c5 and bishop b4, although they are responses, they don't quite solve all Magnus's problems that he could have faced.
Right, Black's pieces get discombobulated. If you play c5 now, the issue is your bishop on d6 is a tall pawn and just staring into its own pawns, which is good for defensive measures, but white can continue to be active, and then black is pushed back further. And so if you play bishop b4, you are attacking the rook slides out of the way, and then when you play c5, your bishop on b4 is stranded over there on the queen side. It's defended by the pawn c5, it's defending the pawn on c5, but the d6 squares you're highlighting, maybe the knight is jumping in, and maybe that bishop can be attacked at some point because it can't move anywhere. So white essentially operates around the bishop, and that's one critical defender missing from the center of the board, and that could cause black some serious problems.
So white did not go for that, as we've been now reviewing here. Rook e to d1 played. Still, as Fabi said, hard to criticize, but here comes bishop e6, which in real time was the simplification we knew black was playing for. It's the thematic idea. Magnus's moves were literally threatening it with queen e8. And I think we were hoping for something more. The last chance after bishop a4 and bishop e7 was again maybe to take on d7 and c4, right, Fabi? Maybe.
Well, just to back up for 1 second, after bishop to a4, we were somewhat hoping for the potential fireworks with queen c8.
Yes.
With the idea potentially of a bishop takes h3 sacrifice, because some of white's pieces are a bit removed from the king side. The queen would be a great defender, but it's not there. The light square bishop is usually a great defender, but it's on a4 rather than on f1, for example. So this would have maybe led to some interest.
We'll show some fun stuff just to show everybody that we're not kidding around when we say this was maybe very dangerous. Crazy things like this where the king can't take it, because how's this for a party coming in at the white king's expense? So there were very real dangers here, but alas, again, we would not see those on the board.
Yeah, instead Magnus chose an understandable and very solid move, bishop d7. And after the trade of bishops, I don't feel like white was really playing for significant advantage anymore. So as you mentioned, instead of knight d2, maybe white's best shot was to take on d7 and play c4. Still, that idea feels like the most ambitious one, trying to gain some space. In this case, it doesn't feel like black encounters significant issues, but it might have, well, rather than bishop f8, maybe
bishop a8,
rook to a8 to stop rook a6.
Yep.
I don't feel like Magnus would have been under serious pressure here, but it would have been a bit less pleasant for him than in the game where he really never struggled. He played quickly and confidently and easily maneuvered himself towards a draw.
And again, by the way, pointed out in real time between Fabiano and Ifan was the nice little point that if bishop takes a4, rook takes a4, black actually has the cute little rook to b2, forcing the exchange anyway because of the queen's overwhelm, and that might even be even better for black than what happened in the game. So, Robert, I'm going to click through these as you give thoughts on this endgame. I mean, obviously we got to a position where Jan was pretending maybe to be pushing, but talk a little bit real quick, last point about Magnus's really stellar defense here.
Yeah, he just retreated before he could go forward. He made sure that all of his bases were covered. First knight to e8, covering the bishop on d6 and the pawn on c7 for good measure. Then he brought his knight to e6, and he protected his e5 pawn with a pawn. Pawn's best friend is another pawn. And to Fabiano's point, that the defense here, Magnus could play with his hand rather than with his brain. You want to make your opponent think on every turn. Here, Magnus had a very clear plan for himself. He made it work. He just orchestrated it very directly, and then he put in his knight on d6, trading his inactive knight for these quite active white knights, and now there are not enough pieces remaining for white to actually have any hope for a win.
Last really educational point for those watching live and maybe those checking out our recap on YouTube. Really nice to see the defensive effort here. You don't ever want to change your defensive structure if you haven't established a clear winning plan for your opponent. Something like this would have been a really good example of how to go wrong. Even if you first look at your pawn as a weakness, it actually closes the D file and immediately gives white long-term chances in which he lacks. So just a fun little point to take away. Another reason why Magnus is great and very tough to beat. He takes with the bishop, backs that thing up, and suddenly you could snapshot it. You could try to even play imaginary chess, as we were discussing, put that white king anywhere on the board, and you hardly have winning chances. And so eventually, even with the d-file opening up, they repeated moves because white recognized the inability to make progress. And that, everyone, is how Game 5 came to an end. Chess.com's coverage of the 2021 FIDE World Championship is brought to you by our partners at Coinbase. Whether you're just thinking about making your first crypto purchase, just wanting to learn a little bit more about the crypto industry, or if you've been doing this thing for years and you're an experienced trader, Coinbase is the place to be. Visit coinbase.com/chess and get $5 in free Bitcoin just for signing up and verifying your account today. We really encourage you to do so. Go check them out at coinbase.com.